Hello, everyone. Thank you so much for tuning in to this episode of the Geek Garage podcast. I'm your host, David Dassaw, as per usual, and joined with me, as per usual, is my lovely, beautiful, talented, fantastic co host, Ted White. How are you doing, good sir?
At least one of those things that you said about me is true, and I will leave it up to our listeners to decide which one it is.
What, good sir?
That is not it.
Or, oh, okay. Well, I mean, I. I'm no good with guessing games, so I'm just gonna leave it up to the listeners, like you said, and we'll have them figure it out and get back to us.
That's our next Facebook poll, actually.
Yeah, right? Yeah, we'll figure it out. Anyways, so if you are experiencing some post spooky season blues, we have the cure for you, actually, because we're experiencing a little bit of the post spooky season blues as well, and plus we thought it would just be fun to do a recap of all the horror movies that Ted and I kind of talked about and saw over the course of October.
Yes, we do not believe that horror movies should be limited to the month of October.
Right. Yeah. It's a year long endeavor, 365, no breaks. But yes, I did watch a shit ton of horror movies in the month of October. I think my goal was to watch one a day. My original goal, I believe I brought this up on an episode not too long ago. My original goal was to watch a new horror movie a day, one that I had not seen before. That was pretty ambitious and it did not pan out, but I did in fact watch a lot of horror movies that I had not seen before. Ted, did you get a lot accomplished in the same right or vein, or did you mostly kind of catch up with stuff that you have seen before?
I mostly stuck to the rivers and the lakes that I was used to.
I see what you did there.
Yes.
Don't go chasing waterfalls.
Do not go Jason Waterfalls. No,
Yeah.
I watched a couple new movies. A couple new. Well, watch a couple new movies every month, really, but a couple new horror movies specifically in October. But mostly, I did a lot of revisiting of classics,
Okay.
or at least to me, what are classics. Some of them for the podcast, some of them just because it's sort of like an annual tradition for me. Like I rewatch Halloween every October, and I have for like 20 years. Um, and just getting to experience some of those movies um, with my girlfriend for the first time, who's not really a big horror fan, was pretty cool. So I did a lot of revisiting, but sort of seeing them for the first time with someone else, I guess, or with someone else seeing them for the first time, I should say, which was pretty cool.
Yeah, I know that you talked a bit about that both on and off the podcast. The majority or a good portion of your horror movie watching was with your lady friends, and I don't know if you want me to say her name on the podcast, but
No,
um,
let's keep her anonymous because anonymous life is happy life. So
right, respect. Uh, yeah, I also
she
have.
goes to another school.
She goes to another
She
school.
she's
You
on
wouldn't
another
know.
podcast. You've never heard of her. It's from Canada.
She doesn't even listen to this podcast. She's too good for it.
That's
But yeah,
actually not wrong. We're digressing. Let's get back on it.
right. But yeah, it's I definitely can relate to that feeling of having some enjoyment with revisiting movies with someone that you care about in some capacity and they have not seen said movie. It's just there's something about it. I think the one movie we've talked about the most with this particular situation is Hereditary, and you in particular,
Yeah.
where you watched it alongside a couple people that hadn't seen it before, and you're just like, "You gonna learn today."
Yeah, it's always fun. Any movie that's got shocking stuff in it or unexpected stuff in it is always fun if you're in on it, so to speak, and the other
Right?
person is not.
Yeah.
Um, Hereditary just goes so completely off the rails that's kind of my favorite one to I guess in a way subject people to almost. Um,
Subject is an appropriate word.
Yeah, because it's an experience. I mean, I don't think it's like the greatest movie of all time or anything. I like it
Right.
a very good amount. It's one of my favorite movies in the last handful of years. You know, it's on the
Yeah.
short list, so to speak. But um, yeah, it just goes so sideways that people's reactions are always so good on that.
Hmm. Yeah, for sure. But yeah, like I said, our plan for this episode is to recap my personal hashtag 31 days of horror, and I'm just gonna rifle through them one after another. I mean, I'm not just gonna spit out the movie titles, but say a few things about each one, and it is completely spoiler free, so don't worry about spoilers. I'm not gonna go into anything in spoiler territory. And then afterwards, we will talk about a couple of our favorite horror movies, like ever.
Yeah.
Not necessarily on
So
this list.
yeah, that was
Y-
suggested by a good friend of the show, longtime friend, just in general, Mr. Jeff Breedwell, who thought it
mhm.
might be a good thing for us to cover. We're a little late with it. I think that was one of his ideas for like an October episode. But like we said,
Yeah.
we are not constrained by the calendar. We live as free men.
Right. Yeah. Jeff, he's been one of our Patreon donors for a couple months now, and that is one of the perks that you get as a Patreon donor when you choose to give your hard-earned $2 or $5 a month to us, so we can pursue our quote-unquote dreams. Um, you get to have some
Think small,
input.
baby.
Right. Yeah. You get to have some input in what goes down on this spiggity podcast. So yeah, without further ado, Ted, you want to go ahead and get this shit show on the road?
Yes, let us.
All right, let us do it. Boop. All right, so welcome back after that intro music. Wasn't it fantastic? The answer is yes. All right, so we're going to get started with the beginning, right? That makes the most sense, I think.
No, I feel like we should start with day 13.
That's actually a good idea. Let's start with day 13. The no.
Or
uh,
workshop.
right, yeah. I mean, why not? Like,
As it turns out, we are somewhat constrained by the calendar.
I mean, it would kind of be an appropriate number to start with, especially if there was a Friday the 13th in October. Wasn't there one like
I was gonna
last
say, I
year?
feel like in my lifetime, in my adult lifetime anyway, there has been one October that was so glorious as to have both a Friday the 13th and, of course, Halloween.
Yeah, yeah. I feel like it was fairly recent, maybe even last year. I don't know, but anyways, yes. Getting started with the movie. So first movie I saw, or yeah, the movie I saw on day one was a movie called Vivarium. It's from 2019. Uh, I just did the years for these. I meant to grab the directors as well because those are also noteworthy. But alas,
Google
here
'em.
we are. Yeah, uh, I'll stick all these movies in the not in the show notes, but in the podcast episode notes in the on the website, so you can have them for your reference. But anyways, so the first movie I watched was Vivarium from 2019. This had Jesse Eisenberg and not Emma Watson, not Emma Stone, not
One of
was
the
Emma
Emmas.
Emma Roberts, I think.
Yeah.
Yes, Emma Roberts, I think. Anyways, one of the Emmas, and it was an interesting way to start out this month. It's well, if you are not a fan of living in a neighborhood where all the houses look alike, you might get a kick out of this movie because that's kind of the premise, so to speak. But yeah, it's basically about this couple who just randomly decides to go look for a house, or look at a model home, and they go to the neighborhood with, I guess, one of the realtors, and they go to look around, and all the houses, they look alike, and they can't get out of the neighborhood when they try to leave, and insanity ensues. So, yeah. Ted, you're not familiar with this one, correct? You didn't get a chance to.
No, I know that you had talked to me about it once you watched it, and I added it to my watch list, but I haven't gotten to it yet,
Yeah,
and probably
it's
won't.
yeah.
Just to be honest, but
No, it's cool. I mean, I know your list, just like my list, and pretty much everyone else's list that you know call themselves a cinephile. It's just ever growing. It never gets shorter, only longer. That's what she said. Um,
well, it gets
but
shorter eventually. But you got to work at it a little bit.
sure, yeah. We'll go with that. Also, as a side note, I don't, for all of the movies that I did for my hashtag 31 days of horror, I don't think there's one movie that I wouldn't really recommend. There are others, there are some that I liked more than others, and some I thought were just okay. But as far as like recommendations, there isn't one on here that I I wouldn't recommend. I know that kind of traditionally, I guess, goes against the whole theme of this 31 days of horror thing, because it's about me posting movies that I like and recommend. But like I said, this year was a little bit different, where I did listener recommendations as well as the movies that I enjoy. So yeah, day number 2, The Invisible Man. This Ted, was this one of the movies that ended up like skipping the theaters and going straight to DVD or
So
streaming
it
or
it had a short theatrical run, I believe.
okay,
This released kind of right as we started to shut down from
right,
COVID
yeah,
earlier in 2020. But I feel like it was in theaters because I want to say you and I talked about going to see it,
hmm,
and then like that weekend the decision came down that was like we're shutting down the studio basically, and basically everything shut down. So
yeah,
it did get sort of rapid release, you might say, on
yeah,
streaming or rental services.
hmm,
And I think it did fairly well. But again, a movie like this probably didn't cost a lot to make, comparatively speaking. So it would have had a much easier break even or profit point than something like Black Widow. They got pushed back because they really need that theatrical money.
you're right, yeah. Yeah, this was definitely one of those movies where I saw the trailer a couple times. I mostly saw it at the beginning of movies that you and I would go see in theaters, and I gotta be honest, like I I think the only reason you and I ended up with plans to go see it was because it had came out and just blew up. Like people, like our friends were recommending it. It was coming highly recommended by horror movie critics and all that. So we were like, well, I apparently it's got something that we didn't really foresee. It seems too much like movies that I've seen before. Like it didn't really look like anything new. So I wasn't super excited about seeing it, but it came across HBO Max uh not too long ago. It is still on there right now, I believe. And yeah, I will definitely eat my words on this one. It was fantastic. I yeah.
Yeah, this one, like, I didn't have very high expectations for it when it was first coming out, or, once it was announced and then, it came out and everything. I didn't have a lot of expectations for it because I'm generally speaking not quite against remakes, but I always treat them with a little bit of skepticism.
Hmm.
Um, I like the director Lee Winnell. Or I believe I'm saying that right. I'm probably not. Some turbo nerd on the internet will be like, "Well, actually, plus he's Australian, I think, so they probably pronounce it like, oh, the shrimp on the bottom, some bullshit." Uh,
Right, just
and
like that.
I was just kind of like, I thought Upgrade was good,
Hmm.
but in terms of his track record with horror movies, like with Saw and Insidious, like I do not care. Um, so I wasn't exactly excited for it, but I've heard nothing but good things about it. So it's, it's another one that I will watch eventually.
Yeah, yeah, it's a good one. Um, Day 3 was Gerald's Game from 2017 from Mr. Stephen King, correct? Well, he didn't direct it, but it was
He did
it.
write it.
Yeah, was Gerald's Game a full-fledged book or was it one of his short stories?
I think
Do,
it
do
was
you
a
remember?
novella.
Okay. Yeah, it felt like a movie based off of at least a short story, if not a novella, because um, I don't know, I just had that feel. Either way, it was pretty good. It took a little bit to get rolling, but once it was in there, like it, I I'm definitely partial to what's his name, Mike Flanagan, who is the director. He also did one or two other movies on my list this month, and then of course he was the director of The Haunting of Bly Manor, The Haunting of Hill House, and so he does that really hazy, dreamy suspense horror feel really well. And yeah, he did a great job of transferring, I guess, the feel of a classic or traditional Stephen King novel onto the screen. I thought so. That was probably one of the top things that I appreciated with this movie. Is just it felt like a movie based off of a Stephen King book. So
Right.
yeah. Day 4 was The Descent from 2005. This was the first time that I had seen The Descent. And I can't remember who recommended this. I apologize in advance. A lot of these came recommended by our fans and listeners on the Facebook group, and I did not take the time to write people's names down. So for that, I apologize.
Way to
But
go, David.
I know, right? I'm doing great. The Descent is,
It's really good.
yeah, it was really good. And it's got an accidental death that cut me to my core. I was like, that fucking sucks. Like,
Yeah. It's
yeah, I
it's,
mean,
it's brutal. Also.
yeah, it's pretty brutal. Also, I one of the things I really appreciated about this movie was I do believe a bit of CG was involved with creating the I forget what they were called. I think they were just called crawlers, maybe.
Hmm.
Um, but these faceless dudes that live down in the cave. But it seemed like dudes in suits, and I think that's part of what sold it for me. Was it? It seemed like just really good acting instead of just throwing some flashy CG in there that probably would have been super dated if they did pure CG in
Hmm.
2005. It,
Yeah.
it wouldn't have looked great nowadays. So yeah, day 5 was Midsommar from 2019. I was actually kind of surprised at myself that this wasn't on my list from last year because I believe it came out in time for me to have it on my list for 2019. I could be mistaken. I don't know. But yes, Midsommar. I don't want to really say much about this because we have like 3 episodes talking
Yeah,
about
we talk
Midsommar.
about it a lot.
Yeah, so if you want to hear our thoughts on Midsommar, and I believe they're pretty much all spoiler-ish, so definitely, make sure you watch the movie before you dive into those previous episodes. But yeah, we this one comes highly recommended by both Ted and I
Hmm.
believe. So yeah, day 6 was American Murder: The Family Next Door. This is probably the only true crime doc that I haven't finished and haven't finished because I had to turn it off. Like it, if you're familiar with the story, you you know what I'm talking about. If not, go look it up. I don't want to take the time to explain it, but yeah, it's real fucked up, and yeah, it's only like an hour and 45 minutes maybe, but I couldn't even finish it because it just hit a little too close to home. So yeah, it was pretty horrific. Number 7, day 7, the murders at White House Farm. This one kind of crept into HBO Max, like, yeah, very very quietly. Just and then I never really heard too many people talking about it, but Lindsay and I decided to check it out. It's not a documentary, but uh, it is a film that is based off of historical true crime events back in the 80s. That happened in some part in London, on a farm called White House Farm. Yeah, it was pretty good. Day 8 was Open Graves. Ted, did I ask you if you've seen this movie?
I don't think so.
Yeah, it's man, I think this movie is probably the lowest rated on my list of this month. It came recommended, and I won't say by who. I do know off the top of my head, but I don't want to have them feel like they're being called out.
It was like, wasn't it like a sci-fi original or something?
um I know that there's other stuff with similar titles. Like when I was looking up the year on IMDb, it's 2009, by the way.
Hmm.
I was typing it in, and there's something called Open Grave, singular, but I mean this one is Open Graves, plural. Um, it's basically Jumanji meets oh god, what was it? It's like Jumanji meets the Ring or something like that. I forget exactly what two
That
movies.
sounds awful. I would like to stop talking about this movie now.
it's it's not fantastic. It has some cool and fun deaths, but it's it's not great. It's not bad, but it's also not fantastic either. Day number 9 was the classic Hellraiser, and uh, our the movie villain from our uh, horror movie villain Bracket Ball. Bracket God, I fucked that up again. Bracket Brawl. Uh, isn't that right, Ted? Yeah, he won, right?
Yeah,
Yeah,
Pinhead won.
yeah. It was, and I think when they had that, we had the final face off between him and Xenomorph. It was actually pretty close. I want to say it was. He only won by like 3 votes, maybe 3 or 4 votes.
Yeah, if I'm remembering correctly, the numbers you gave me, I think it was 3 or 4 votes.
Yeah. So yeah, it was pretty close. Also, just as a side note, while we're talking about this, thank you to everyone who participated in that. We greatly appreciate it. It was a lot of fun, a lot of work on my part, but I'm very happy with all the interaction we got for the month of October. Because apparently we have a lot of horror movie fans that listen to the podcast.
Pivoting to true crime.
Right. Yeah, it's happening. It's one of our plans for 2021.
Yeah.
Um, but yeah, Hellraiser, that was day 9. There's really nothing that I can say that hasn't already been said about this movie. It is, of course, a classic. It was the first time that I had seen it, and yeah, I did like it. I thought it was good. Day 10 was Scanners from 1981. This was a first watch as well, and yeah, I thought it was okay. The head exploding, it wasn't. I don't know if I was just under some sort of weird false assumption, but there was a lot less head exploding than I originally anticipated. Like, I don't know why I was anticipating a lot of head exploding, but there really wasn't much. It was basically just a lot of people with terrible migraines, basically.
Yeah, the head exploding is really just kind of the one scene, if I recall, or at least the one really gratuitous scene.
Yeah.
Um, Yeah, Scanners is a classic for a reason, a cult classic for a reason. Good film. I wouldn't go so far as to say great film. I think it's a great concept, but I mean, I don't know. I don't want to say it was executed poorly. I think it was a victim of like what they were able to do with what they
Right.
had
Yeah.
and what they could get away with.
Right.
But good movie, and like I said, cult classic for a reason. For me
Yeah.
personally, I highly recommend it.
Yeah, for sure. Yeah, and I am glad that I finally got to catch up with it, watch it for the first time. Day 11 was Green Room from 2015. Uh, R.I.P. Anton Yelchin. We miss you every day, buddy. But yeah, this was a well, it was interesting to see Sir.
So
Uh,
Patrick Stewart playing off type,
yes,
way off type.
right. He typically does not play the bad guy in the movies that he is in,
He
but
was
he
saving all of it for this role,
right, he
where he plays
fucking
the worst guy.
right, he fucking cashed in with this one. I mean, a fucking white supremacist neo-Nazi in Oregon. Like, yeah, I don't see how you get any worse than that. So he definitely cashed in on it. But yeah, uh, I did not rewatch this. It was a random, one that I thought of that I hadn't talked about before. Yeah, it's definitely good. It's not your classic horror, I guess. It's definitely got some elements of suspense and uh, drama and all that. So it's not like a slasher or anything, but it's it's still a lot of fun. Um,
In a manner
it,
of speaking, yes.
right, yeah. Number 12 was Leatherface. I wanted to get at least one of the sequels, or reboots, or rehashes, whatever you want to call it, in the subsequent Texas Chainsaw Massacre franchise under my belt. Just to say that I could. And this is the one that I ended up going with. I think it's actually, now that I think of it, it's because it came recommended by our dear friend Shauna, who's of course been on the podcast several times. Shout out to Shauna Hoyt. Um, yeah, I actually like this. It had I think I don't I don't think we actually talked about it at all during our episode of Texas Chainsaw Massacre. I know we had it in our notes to possibly touch on some of the subsequent um, reboots and sequels and whatnot in the franchise, but we just didn't get around to it. Anyways, uh, yeah, I thought it was pretty good. It was definitely within the contemporary hillbilly horror genre. It's pretty good. I liked it. Number 13 was The Haunting of Bly Manor. Of course, this is the new one that came out this year. It was pretty good. I don't think I liked it as much as The Haunting of Hill House. It definitely didn't have the scary beats that the the Haunting of Hill House did. But if you like The Haunting of Hill House, well, you've probably already seen this, so I wouldn't even really bother with saying I suggest you watch this then, because if you watch The Haunting of Hill House, like I said, you probably dove right into this. Number 14 was Mindhunter, and I caught some flack for this one because, yes, it's not technically horror, but I was, I'll be honest, I was grasping at straws. It was like 11 o'clock at night, and I realized that I had not posted a horror movie that night or that day. And so I just, the first,
Sometimes you get what you get, Chief.
yes. And so that's what I posted. Yes, like I said, it's not horror, but it's about the FBI and I think it's the 50s or the 60s. It is whenever the like the Georgia monster case was a huge thing. Ted, I don't know if you're familiar with that case and when
Not
that
intimately,
was.
no.
Okay. But yeah. like I said, caught some flack for that because it's not traditionally horror, but I went with it anyways, so it's our podcast, fuck it. So day number 15 was As Above, So Below from 2014. Ted, have you seen this movie?
No, I have not. I'm aware of it. I haven't seen it. This is probably an unfair categorization on my part, but it really reminded me of this older, not not older in the sense of like it's old as a movie, but older in the sense of it came out before As Above, So Below,
Hmm.
called Catacombs. It just reminded me a lot of that, and I hated that movie so much. I was like, I refuse.
Yeah, it's okay. I thought it was pretty good. It was kind of sorta a found footage movie. It's it's filmed in the style of found footage, but um, well, I can't really say anything more than that because then it gets into spoiler territory. But yeah, it's basically like that where they go below looking for uh I think the main character, the girl, her dad died, and he was trying to unearth um, this piece of art that would prove this lifelong theory that he was trying to formulate, and she was basically just trying to continue his work and reaffirm his legacy and legitimize it. And yeah, shit gets real weird. That's kind of a common theme with some of the movies that I experienced this month and watched for the first time is like just don't go underground or in the water. Like
Fact check
places,
true.
yeah, places that you just really have no uh you have no there's no point for you to be there. Like just stay the fuck out. That's the gist
Cave
that I got.
bad, water bad, catacombs in Paris full of dead people bad. Those are the rules, okay?
I didn't make them, but they're the rules.
That's
So,
right.
right, follow them. Yeah. Day number 16 was Killer Clowns from Outer Space from 1988, and holy shit, like this might be this is definitely within the top 3 of my favorites from this month.
It's
I
so insane.
Yeah, in terms of the new movies that I checked out. So Ted, you are familiar with this one, right?
Yeah, I mean, this is like just about as cult classic gets, right?
Right. Yeah, I mean, it's if you looked up cult classic in the dictionary,
It's on.
this
It's one of the examples.
right, this and Snakes on a Plane will be in there, and that's
That's a
a
teaser.
yes, that is a teaser. Uh but yeah, I fucking love this movie. I just randomly happened upon it. I think it was maybe on Amazon Prime. It's free streaming on one of the streaming services. And I was literally scrolling through the horror movie section trying to find something that I hadn't seen before and something that looked good. And I came across this and I was like, just because of the title alone, I was like, fucking sold.
Yeah,
And I was not disappointed whatsoever. Like,
yeah.
I, um, I would say quote unquote trigger warning if you're interested in seeing this movie, but if you have a thing with clowns, like
Skip it.
there's
Yeah,
yeah, skip it. Just yeah, Ted said it the best. Skip it because the clown suits are well, they're like 8 feet tall and it's all costumes. Very elaborate costumes, and no two are alike. Like my hat goes off to the costume and prop decorators for this movie because they did a fucking awesome job at this. Like it's is insane. But yeah, this movie's a trip. Definitely recommend it. Day 17 was the Poughkeepsie tapes. This movie also came recommended. It's from 2007. It took me, I think, 10-15 minutes into the movie to realize or discover that it was not a documentary. It is in fact a mockumentary because I just it came recommended and I started watching. I didn't really do much research on it, and they were like, "It'll fuck you up, fam," and I was like, "Okay." and so I started watching it. Ted, you haven't seen this one, right?
No, I'm not familiar with this one.
Yeah, it's man, am I glad that it turns out that it was not real, because there's parts of it that are truly upsetting. And definitely would have been more upsetting if they actually happened. Um, I mean, it the way a lot of the movie is edited and spliced together is that you're watching these home movies that this just insane homicidal lunatic made, and you're just going through the footage and seeing the way that he treated his victims, which is not great. Um, so yeah, it was an interesting film. Day number 18 was It Chapter 2 from last year, 2019. Um, I side with the majority of people that talk about It Chapter 2 in that it is good, but not as good as the first. Um, I don't know what it was that just didn't make it as good as the first one, but yeah, I mean, I still did enjoy it, but yeah, it was. I don't know. I like Bill Hader, and I like uh, all the other James McAvoy and all the other people that were in it. They did a pretty good job, but yeah, uh, I think a lot of the I don't know the scariness of it, I guess, with Bill Skarsgård's Pennywise depiction, it was kind of like, I don't know what the right word would be, like spoiled for the first movie. Like, you had already seen Pennywise, so come It Chapter 2, he wasn't really that scary anymore. So
Well, once you see him get his ass kicked by a bunch of 12-year-olds, there's just not much you can, you know.
right, yeah. So day number 19, that was Pan's Labyrinth. I actually I wanted to revisit this movie, but unfortunately didn't get a chance to. But I obviously have seen it. It's it is a doozy.
Yeah,
But
it's a
yeah, I
great,
mean
great
it.
movie.
Yeah, it's directed by Mr. What's his face?
Guillermo del Toro.
Yeah, and yeah, I think this was the very first movie of his that I saw, I believe. And I mean, I wasn't really tuned into like actors, or not actors, directors at the time when I saw this movie and it first came out. Like, knowing actors' names and what they've done wasn't really on my radar, but knowing that he did this movie made me want to go check out other movies of his. So yeah, definitely recommend it. Day number 20 was Would You Rather from 2012. This was just like the title suggests, a game of Would You Rather, that has deadly consequences. I was apprehensive to check it out because I'm not a huge fan of torture porn, because that's kind of what I assumed it was going to be. And it was a little bit, but it wasn't gratuitous, so I appreciated that, definitely. But there is a little bit, like I said, so if you are not cool with the torture porn subgenre of horror, I say maybe skip it, because it does have a little bit of that. Day number 21 was The Autopsy of Jane Doe. That was pretty decent, from 2016. I think that one came recommended by a friend of mine. It was pretty good. I you know it's not my favorite horror movie of all time, but pretty good. Day number 22, I actually forgot to post a movie on that day.
Doing great.
So yep, I'm the best host in the entire universe. Thank you very much. Day number 23 was Silence of the Lambs. All right, is she a creepy fat person?
Well, I have some thoughts on this movie, but I'll hold them off for now. We'll
Okay.
circle back to it.
Okay. Oh, okay. Yeah. Yeah. This. I mean, I did actually revisit this movie for this month, and yeah, well, I'll save my thoughts until later on. Uh, but just know that, yeah, if you haven't seen this movie yet, what are you doing with your life?
Yeah, you're
So
fucking up bad.
Yeah. Day number 24 was Us from 2019. I I was definitely a fan of Jordan Peele's first movie.
Get Out.
Yes, thank you. Get Out. And so yeah, I think I was just waiting for this movie to come out on a streaming service to check out, and it was pretty good. I liked it. I don't want to butcher her name. Lupita Nyong'o.
Yeah.
Is that how, yeah?
Um,
Her performance is fucking phenomenal. Like she just crushes it in this
yeah, he's
movie.
very good in this film.
Like her facial expressions alone just, I mean, blew me out of the water in terms of, the horrific faces she's able to make, and the wide eyes. Is just, she's an incredibly talented actor, and yeah, I definitely recommend this movie for just the acting props alone. So
Yeah, good film. Falls apart in the third act, like completely falls apart, but
yeah,
really, really good for 2/3 of it.
we're not gonna get into that.
Yeah.
Um, like we said, we're not really going into spoilers, at least for these. Day number 25 was Doctor Sleep, 2019. Talk about a movie that falls apart. Well, I guess that would insinuate that it was put together in the first place.
Oh.
Um, yeah, Ted, you haven't seen this movie, right?
No, not all of it. I kind of was just like, no, we're done with this, and went on about my life. Sorry, Ewan. I know you tried, buddy, but it just is what it is. So I read something about this movie that I think really hits the nail on the head. They were like, um, it seems like they tried to marry both The Shining in terms of Kubrick's vision with The Shining and Doctor Sleep in terms of what Stephen King did, and it did not work because
Hmm.
those are two very different things. So it's kind of jarring in my opinion. I mean, it's not. I'll probably end up finishing it just because like there's going to be a part of my brain that's not going to shut up until I have finished it. But it's
Right.
not great.
Yeah, it's. I mean, how the fuck do you make a sequel to The Shining? Like, how do you do that? Uh, I mean,
You shouldn't.
obviously, yeah, it was done. I'm not sure who asked for it, but it's out there.
Give
So,
me names. I want to know.
uh, yeah, it's. I thought it was okay. Like, I didn't hate it. I didn't think it was bad. I also did not think it was great. Kind of just piggybacking off what Ted said. It's, you know,
It's a movie.
it is in fact a movie. Day number 26 was A Quiet Place. I know Ted is real high on this movie.
Yeah.
I really enjoy this movie. I'm excited for the sequel, assuming that it's going to come out, like, period. I mean, who knows what the fuck is in store for movies in the future in terms of theatrical releases. But yeah, I'm definitely excited for the sequel. I like this one. I thought it was a solid first time effort for John Krasinski. I thought the acting performances across the board were really good. And it was, had some good scary elements and suspenseful parts. So yeah. Uh, Number 27, Ready or Not from 2019. So I think I said about Killer Clowns, it was, at least in my top three of favorites from this list. Ready or Not is hands down top one. Number one. Like, this movie was so much fun to watch. And it was kind of alongside Invisible Man, where I thought it was going to be too predictable, and it just seemed like something I had seen before already. But I was pleasantly surprised, and yeah, it was just an insane amount of fun to watch. I definitely recommend it. That's about as far as I can go with, without spoiling anything. They basically play a deadly game of Hide and seek, more or less. Um, where the one of the main characters, the girl, she marries into the family, and they have to play a game, and that game is hide and seek. Kind of weird, but yeah, that's how it goes. Number 28 was Eraserhead from 1977. This was the first time that I watched this movie. I texted Ted right when I was starting to watch it, and Ted, I believe your words were "have fun with that."
That sounds like what I would say. Yes.
And
uh,
quite
yeah,
appropriate. Yeah, right.
Eraserhead is not for, well, David Lynch sort of in general is not for everyone. I think Eraserhead is especially not for everyone.
Yeah,
I love it. I love David Lynch's work. Um, but it'll fuck you up, fam.
yeah. It is in fact real weird. And I'll echo what you said. It's not for everyone. I definitely liked it. I appreciated it. I don't think David Lynch is. I don't know. He's one of those directors that makes movies that I appreciate the hell out of, but for some reason have a hard time like really getting into it and liking them. Like I said, I appreciate the hell out of it, uh, but yeah, it's this one was a trip, man. It's crazy. Day number 29 was Suspiria, the old one, the OG from 1977. This, yeah, another weird one. I
Yes.
this Mr. Dario Argento, right?
Dario Argento, yes.
Yeah. Um, there is there is a crazy spaghetti horror subgenre following that I didn't really know existed
Yeah, man,
until
those Yellow films are like, they've got a very devout following.
yeah. And apparently this is Suspiria is part of that kind of um, realm. I mean, it fits the bill. But yeah, I feel like I owe it to that community and just myself to check out more. Like, I guess they're called spaghetti horrors. I mean, spaghetti westerns are a thing. So
Yeah, I mean, spaghetti horror, Giallo films. Giallo is the Italian word for yellow. And the reason these are called that is it's sort of a catch-all term for like horror, mystery, thriller. It's like basically what you would consider like pulp or genre
sure.
films. And the reason that they're called that is because when those books were printed in Italy, all the covers were yellow.
Hmm.
Um, but it's like I said, it's sort of a catch-all term. So there's like movies like Suspiria, but then there's also like Fulci's zombie films, which are very different sorts of horror, um, that kind of fall under that same umbrella.
Right. Yeah. But no, I liked it. I actually I kind of meant to check out the remake of Suspiria because it kind of it comes recommended every once in a while. Like it's one of those like I think polarizing remakes where there's a lot of like devout you know OG Suspiria fans that are like fuck that remake, and then there's a lot of people that also really enjoy the original but say the remake was actually pretty good. So it's been on my list for a while. I think it's actually streaming on Amazon Prime. So,
Yeah, I'm pretty sure it was an Amazon film.
oh, was it?
I think so.
Okay,
It is on Prime, but I think it was an Amazon movie.
gotcha.
I think that the remake is different enough that it is. Okay, I think it's worth viewing regardless.
Okay,
I think it's different enough that you'll get something else out of the experience than you did from the original. I can understand that being said, why some fans of the original dislike the new one because, like I said, it is a bit different.
hmm
But I think in terms of remakes, like I'd rather watch something that is a little bit different and newer in the sense of they're not just rehashing the same movie again
hmm
than just somebody that's like, hey, remember this movie? It's got better effects now. Not that being said, I do think that there are some movies that could use a fresh coat of paint in the sense of basically it's the same movie with better effects, but that's another discussion for another time.
Yeah, and I think we've actually, I don't know how serious we were with the episode topic possibility, but I think we were throwing it around at one point in time where, we could in the future come up with an episode where we talk about movies and not just horror, every genre, uh, where with movies that could stand for a remake just for that alone, like it was kind of underappreciated. I think the one that came up was Candyman, where we were talking about it, and I told you that I hadn't seen it before, and you said that it was when it came out, it kind of came unappreciated, but then it grew like a kind of a devout following within the horror genre, and but just could stand for a bit of a facelift.
Well, it's getting one,
Right? Yeah.
so we'll see. Jury's
Um,
still out on that, but anyway, to be determined.
yeah. Well, I mean, whenever that day comes. Um, yeah, number day 30 was His House. It was pretty good. Like it was a tight little horror movie. Like it was pretty solid. It wasn't that long, but it packed quite a punch in its relatively shorter run time. So yeah, definitely recommend that one. And last day 31, was Lovecraft Country from this year. And yeah, this is basically like H.P. Lovecraft's work translated to the screen. That's more or less, well, at least one of the elements of this show. And it's fucking weird, but very good. And if you're into weird horror slash sci-fi slash creepy crazy shit, then I recommend it. It's it's got some interesting racial issues because it takes place in, oh boy, it's, I think it's the 40s because it's either post or in the middle of World War II, I believe. Um, but yeah, either way, um, definitely recommend it. It's good, and I think I read, I forget the actor's name. He played the main character. Atticus, he is possibly in talks for coming into the MCU, I believe, in the new Ant-Man movie. I think I just saw that uh, earlier today or yesterday. Either way, um, it's a little fun tidbit, well, quote unquote fun. I guess that depends on your definition of fun. Yeah. Anyways, that was my list. I took up way too much time talking about these movies. I apologize. I am, of course, a little long-winded. Ted, would you like to segue into our next segment?
So, like we talked about at the beginning of the episode, our good friend and patron Jeff Breedwell suggested that we rattle off about some of our favorite horror movies. I think he suggested a top 10, which no, too many. But I think we were able to narrow it down to, I think we ended up deciding on five each.
Yeah.
So, Jeff, because you are a patron, and that should carry some kind of weight, we decided to go with your idea. So if you would like to give us ideas, you have to be a patron to do that. Or, well, yeah, let's just leave it at that.
Yeah, that, like we've said, we've promoted the our Patreon plenty of times in the past, and we try and do it every episode, but there are some cool perks that come alongside it, and like we've talked about on social media recently, if we recorded some extra content regarding the ghost stories that were written into us, and all that. Ted did the honors of reading some. uh,
Woo.
so we, yes, thank you, good sir. So we released that, and or are releasing that, and the full conversation I had between two of my friends, Megan and Miranda, those will be bonus content for our Patreon subs. So if you'd like to check those out, definitely visit our Patreon. We do suggest doing one of the monthly tiers, but if you would just like to make a one-time donation, that is also acceptable, and you will get access to the content. So, yeah. Ted, you want to hit us with your films?
Yes, I in fact do want to hit you with my films, which I don't know if you know this, David, but you've been mispronouncing that word incorrectly the whole time.
Oh, okay.
Yeah,
Well,
it's uncomfortable. So these aren't in any sort of like ranked order. These are just the movies that I hold kind of near and dear to my heart from horror. A couple of these are on my short list of favorite movies of all time, and the rest are just movies that I really like a lot. I'm going to cheat a little bit and stretch the definition of horror, but it's our podcast, so fuck you, I'm doing what I want to. The first one is John Carpenter's The Thing. I've talked about this movie a lot on the podcast. We had an entire episode dedicated to it, which made me very happy. This is quite literally top 2 or 3 movies of out of like all the movies I've ever seen that I love. Um, I watch this movie probably 4 times a year, and I have for the last 2 decades, and I don't see that changing in the next 2 decades or the 2 decades after that if I'm fortunate enough to have that many more years, which I'm not going to, but that's not here nor there. I just love this movie so much. It's just very very close to being perfect. Um, and I've said a bunch about it already, so go back and listen to our episode on it or check it out. Fantastic fucking movie.
yeah.
Second is another John Carpenter movie, another classic, and that is Halloween. Again, talked about this movie extensively on the podcast. We did an episode, we did a watch along for it. Um, it just holds a special place in my heart. It's the first slasher that I ever recall seeing. Um, no movie has ever really quite scared me the way this one did the first time I watched it, and I still kind of get like I basically have the movie memorized at this point. I still kind of get like weird chills knowing about uh, I still get weird chills even though I know what's going to happen, and to me that's the mark of a great movie. Silence of the Lambs. This is where I'm cheating a little bit because I don't know that it's an out and out horror film, but a fantastic movie. It's one of the few films that basically swept all the major categories of the Oscars.
Hmm.
So that's a pretty big thing. Great movie, great acting, great characters, and great little nods in the background. Setting up the scenes. Like there's a scene where Jodie Foster gets in the elevator and she's the only woman, and all the men in the elevator immediately start kind of like looking at her and like chuckling to themselves.
Hmm.
So it does a really good job of setting up kind of like she's very much in a male dominated space in a male dominated world, and kind of what that's like just as a struggle in and of itself on top of all the other stuff. So it's a great great fucking movie. I cannot say enough good things about it. And kind of piggybacking on that, I'm doubling up for this pick. The first movie in the Hannibal Lecter series, Manhunter. Um, that's a great movie too. Very different than Silence of the Lambs, but very very good as well. If you can track down a copy of that, highly recommend it. Michael Mann film, comes highly recommended from me. Next is Jaws. Again, I don't think a lot of people consider this a horror movie, but if you really stop and think about it, it's terrifying.
Yes.
And to the people that saw it when it came out, it was terrifying. um, very close to a perfect movie. There's very little in this film that doesn't work well, and it's amazing how well some of it works, and sort of a happy accident because
Yes.
it may be an apocryphal story, but um, apparently Spielberg and company wanted to use a lot more of the shark so that you
Hmm.
saw a lot more of the shark, but it didn't work. The mechanical shark got wet and wouldn't work correctly, and that ended up making it even better because it leaves it to the imagination.
Yeah.
But I love this movie. I watch it as often as I can, and it's another one that I bought like 4 times because another newer version comes out, and I'm like, oh, the 20th anniversary, oh, the 30th, oh, the 40th anniversary, but just a fantastic movie. And then for my last pick, I couldn't decide between these two, so I'm gonna pick both of them. But it's Evil Dead 2 and Army of Darkness. Um, I think I enjoy Army of Darkness more, but it's not really a horror movie. Evil Dead 2 still, while it has a lot of those same slapstick elements as Army of Darkness and comedic elements, it's definitely more of a straight head horror film. So I'm kind of cheating and doubling up. But I love that whole Raimi trilogy, the Evil Dead trilogy. I like Sam Raimi a lot. I think he's kind of underrated as a
Hmm.
director. Everybody is always talking about Spider-Man, which, two and a half of those movies are really good. Um, but this to me is like his, probably terrible to say, and he would probably hate it because they're like the first three movies he made, really. But they're kind of his best. I just have the most fun with them, and they don't have that weird tree scene like the first one does. They kind of not quite ruins the movie for me, but definitely puts a bad pallor over the whole thing. So that's my list. It's not anything groundbreaking, but those are the ones that I kind of went to and was like, all right, which of these that I've seen do I enjoy the most? And those are the ones I came up with.
Yeah, it's a solid list, and not too abstract or abnormal. I think it's pretty reasonable to, you know, it,
Yeah, I thought about putting Begotten on there, and I was like, Ted, that's too much. The listeners are not ready for that.
Begotten. God, why is that? That's. I feel like I've
That's that
heard of that.
weirdo black and white movie I told you to watch.
Oh, the one that's free
The
to
short film.
stream on YouTube or
Yeah,
whatever. Oh,
yeah,
Jesus Christ,
yeah,
that movie is.
yeah. Like I said, they're not ready for that, so I couldn't put it on the list.
No. Well, I mean, it's too late, cat's out of the bag. We brought it up, but yeah, if you want some sort of experience, you know, go see that.
Begotten. Yeah.
Yeah, it's fucking weird. Anyways, yeah, like I said, Ted, solid list. Fans of pretty much. I'm a fan of pretty much all those movies. So yeah, good job. Um, so my list, you get to hear more movies that I like. So first on the list, something a little bit more contemporary is Hereditary. Won't spend too much time on this because we have we done an episode on this
No,
movie?
we haven't done an episode dedicated to it, but we've talked
Okay.
about it several times on the podcast.
Yeah, and because of that, like I said, I won't spend too much time on it, but it is probably my favorite contemporary horror movie, like of the last 10 years or so. Granted, take that with a grain of salt because one, it's my opinion, and two, I am like horror isn't my favorite genre. It's up there, but it's not my favorite. So I'm not necessarily one to, go out and see every single horror movie of all time. So, anyways, next on the list is I just put the Friday the 13th franchise. Like, it's just, I had a lot of fun powering through all of these movies, like in the span of a month and a half. It was an interesting time, but yeah, these movies are something else. And I gotta say, like, there's something about the ladies in the 70s and 80s, man. Like that time, Ted, you call it the halcyon days or some shit.
Yeah, the Halcyon Days.
Yeah, it was. I don't know. It just does something for me. Yeah, you know, Jason with the big ass machete. We've talked about before on the podcast. We've done at least one watch along. So, like I said, with Hereditary, I won't talk about this a whole lot, but yeah, just fan of the franchise as a whole. I don't know if I have a favorite. I know that I tend to like the movies more after the fourth one. I think when they introduce Tommy, what's his name? Um, but yeah, overall, I think it's a pretty solid franchise. Uh, next on the list is another classic, The Exorcist. I've talked about this on the podcast a couple times before, but yeah, I don't know. This is one of the few horror books that I've read, and it scared the shit out of me just as much as the movie did. And yeah, it's solid flick. Halloween, both the original from what was it, Ted 80?
1978.
Yeah, thank you. And then the 2018 pseudo sequel, I guess if you want to call it that, whatever it is, where it basically just said, yeah, 2 through like 18, like fuck all those others. This is the real sequel to the original. Um, and then The Ring. This is another contemporary one. Well, I mean, it came out in like 2005, I think, 2005, 2006. So it's, not quite as contemporary as like Hereditary, but I remember being freaked the fuck out after I saw this movie. Like I had a hard time going to sleep that night, so it was pretty scary. And then the last on the list is The Shining, one of my fucking classic favorite horror movies of all time. It's just, in my opinion, doesn't get much better than that. It's a good one. So yeah, that's my list.
Yeah, that's a solid list. The Shining came very close to being on my list as well.
Hmm.
Um, just a fantastic performance from Jack Nicholson, and I mean, you really can't go wrong with Kubrick.
Yeah, I mean, Shelley Duvall as well. Like, I
Also
mean,
great, yes.
yeah, you know, we can wax and wane about Kubrick's directing style, and the fact that he got that performance out of her by driving her insane to the point where like she basically didn't want to act anymore. I don't know if that was the sole reason, but there's a lot of behind the scenes trivia and whatnot for The Shining about like the infamous stairs scene where she backs up slowly swinging the baseball bat at Jack Nicholson's character. Like what they said, they did like 140 takes of that, like in one day or something, or while they were filming that scene. Does that sound right, Ted? Like it was just
Yeah,
astronomically
Kubrick was
high.
known as an unhealthy perfectionist and would take a lot would have a lot of takes
Hmm.
to get the one that he felt was the right one. Um, yeah, his treatment of Shelley Duvall in that film is not anything to really speak about in glowing terms.
Right.
Um, so yeah, good on you for bringing that up. But
Yeah.
yeah, it is. I don't know. Do the ends justify the means? So
Yeah, that's a tough one to talk about because I mean, there's directors out there that have done similar things, but they did it differently to a point where it's not bordering, or it is um, like just straight up abuse of your actors. And that's basically what it boils down to in this case. um like I said, there's been instances of this in filmmaking, but just not as extreme. But it's one of those things, like Ted, like you said, it's definitely worth mentioning when you talk about the acting performances in this movie. Well, listeners, thank you so much for tuning in to this episode. We greatly appreciate it. Like I said, we do have some bonus content coming your way. If you would like to throw us a one-time donation or subscribe to one of our monthly tiers, you can partake in that content, hear some cool conversations and ghost stories that we talked about. As always, if you haven't subscribed to the podcast yet, please do so and leave us a rating and review on either Stitcher or Apple Podcasts. Remember, 1 star or 5 stars, nothing in the middle, none of the middle of the road bullshit.
that's right. You commit, goddammit.
Yes. And yeah, I think that's it. As always, be kind, stay geeky, and eat lots of cheesecake. Bye!